And the link to the document is in Jitsi in the channel. So, intro to this project. So first off, what are we actually building? The main thing that we're trying to accomplish is to create a front end for cadCAD simulation of conviction voting and the augmented bonding curve. So we have a cadCAD model already, and it's totally usable. Like you can go into the Google Colab and you can run it, and you can hack into the Python code and you can change some things and then run it again. But you really have to be a developer. Like there's no, and our goal with this project is to make it so that someone who's relatively interested in technical things, but maybe doesn't have the technical skills, or maybe they do have the technical skills, it doesn't really matter. We want to make it really easy for them to take our simulation of the commons and tweak some parameters and see how that changes the results of the outputs of cadCAD. And the scope is basically in the stuff above. There's a lot of details about like what's in scope and what's out of scope, and I don't want to repeat it because it is in this document pretty well. But it's really to produce a piece of front-end code, something that we can put on a website that will allow someone to just type in an input into a front end and then have it change what the Google Colab has in it. So then we can use Google as the engine for running the simulation, and then it will spit out some cadCAD outputs. And we need to make sure that people understand what the inputs are that they're changing and what the outputs are that they're producing, and be able to understand those things. So that's kind of the main thing that we're doing. What's not in scope that's important is we're not going to try to change the cadCAD simulation too much. We want to, other than maybe make it more readable and documented. If there is something that like we want to try to limit the scope to making cadCAD usable instead of using cadCAD ourselves right now. And we don't actually have to like integrate, we don't have to produce any content. We can leave that out of scope for now. If all of a sudden, if we feel like producing content, we can bring it in. But the real goal is just to make sure that we produce the POC and don't get bogged down with too much extra work. Ravi and I are kind of the main points of contact for this project, but it is a community project. We are just the facilitators. In the end, Ravi and I are not developers, so we're kind of useless, except for like helping you guys just be able to work on the project and do the fun parts that you want to do. And then we can kind of make sure that the stuff that has to get done that no one wants to do actually gets done. And we'll do a lot of the community organizing and try to get more people to come in as well. There are two main deliverables of this project. Obviously, the first one is really clear. It's to build a POC from the scope of work above. But the second one is kind of interesting. The Common Stack has a philosophy that we don't want to have a dev team. And this is because we've seen what's happening with Aragon right now, and like other projects that are like, hey, decentralize onto my platform, where the project develops a certain level of technical expertise, which makes it difficult for other developers to come in and contribute. Because
sorry. You said we don't want to have something. I didn't catch that word.
A dev team.
A development team. Okay, great.
Yeah, we don't want. The Common Stack wants to be librarians.
Protocol or something.
Yeah, we are focusing on the design. So Block Science is our design team, and we're going to do a lot of cadCAD models. And we will pay people to build reference implementations, But those reference implementations, those field test commons that we will end up building, we want to make sure that, like, hey, the team that built that, they're going to do that. You know, we hired them. They're hired guns, and they built a very low scoped project that isn't perfect. But there's opportunity for other developers to come in, test their theories on what could make it better using our models, and which we are the experts in, and we will help them use. And there probably will not be there. We will unfortunately create a little bit of centralization there, where it's just like difficult for other people to compete with working with these models. But it won't be difficult to compete with working with the implementers. And so there's a huge I think there's a huge advantage for like real decentralization and allowing people to deploy their own independent projects. But for that to work, we need to train the next crew of token engineers. We need to enable token engineers and we need to enable software developers to come in and understand the value of robust token engineering. And it is the Common Stack's goal to facilitate as many developers as possible into coming in and contributing to the modeling process. And so that's background for the second deliverable of this project, which is giving developers ownership over the Common Stack and the code base of the Common Stack. That is not us. We want to have like a community of developers that are excited about this project and contribute to this project, and can even earn bounties for contributing to the project, but not. But the main goal is really for their own like knowledge and training, so that they can be like on the forefront of the new like token engineering world. So this is kind of our first test on that. Yeah. What's up, TJ? Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. I saw a hand come up, so I was like, oh, okay. Okay.
I also think that as cadCAD matures as a product, it's the ability for the average community user to participate in even development will increase, because I was after some conversations with some team members, they are very much headed to a place where it's going to be like Figma, where you just have a bunch of little components that you can put together, and to create a flow, you model it and run it, see what happens. You can quickly iterate, edit. So it's more, the implementation right now will be open to everybody. But I think as cadCAD develops as a tool, that kind of penetration of people in the entire development lifecycle will be deeper and deeper. Where the average, when I say average, someone who doesn't have like in-depth knowledge of the modeling process, that'll be more and more closer and closer to development rather than just implementation.
Yeah. So perfect. So now the next section of this call is going to be fun. It's kind of like an AMA style. The goal of this time is to basically figure out what questions need to be answered, or is for everyone to ask questions. And we can popcorn style, like you just ask a question when you want. Ideally, the question is about the scope of work, about this project. Some of the questions Ravi and I can probably answer in this call, but a lot of the questions actually will be kind of like homework for us to figure out what the answers to those questions are. A good example that I think will need to be asked, so I'm going to ask it to start, is like what inputs do we want to have in the front end, and what outputs do we want to have coming out for the end users to see, and how many of those, and for each thing, and which ones should it be. That's going to be a homework assignment for sure, because in the end, like I said, Ravi and I don't have any more authority than anyone else on this project. In fact, we should probably have less. So picking
consummate with a lack of technical skills. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, exactly. So picking, and this is one of the this is probably the funnest part of the project, in my opinion, is picking out which inputs people can use, and which outputs people will get out of the actual end product. So yeah.
So just before we do the AMA, I had a quick question. How many of you actually went through the code? And if you did, I'm curious to see what you thought about, what is currently available in structure, in terms of inputs, outputs, documentation, how the code is written, any of that stuff. Does anyone have any comments from their study, if any happened?
Did you ask how many of us have gone through the book? You're talking about
the
collab?
code, the code, yeah, the collab sheet that was out there for the CV3.
I went through it.
What were your thoughts?
Oh my God, what is this?
It's like Frankenstein's monster.
No, I'm not at all familiar with Jupyter notebooks or a lot of Python stuff, but I saw a lot of very interesting things that I would like to dig into a lot deeper. It definitely assumed that, well, that sheet that I looked at, or that collaboration thing, definitely assumed a very large knowledge base as far as how these things work. So,
right. Yeah.
And that's, so in the scope of work, I see documentation of this, documentation of that, documentation of this. So yeah, it definitely needs, and it needs maybe some explanation of the words as well. So there's a lot of words in there that are very, they're understandable to people that have been in the work for a while, but to a new person, they're very difficult to understand what they even mean. Conviction voting, I mean, I apologize for not even knowing what that is, but there's just these words in there that can use some definitions and stuff. So. But it looked great. I love the charts. I love the graphs.
Did you think the graphs were easy to understand or understandable at all?
Well, see, then this is the word issue again, because the graphs are explained with a single line or 2 lines or something, but it's explained in the words of the the language of token engineering, and that's understandable. But it kind of just dumped. It just dumped on the reader as the reader encountered it.
Do you Griff, do you want to share the sheet that I was editing with the document, a couple of examples of the documentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to, yeah, of course.
Let me share that. I would like your input, Thomas, to see if like what I had started doing was adequate enough, and we'll spend a quick 5 minutes on this and then move into the AMAs. Or, you know what, better still, why don't we do this at the end? Why don't we do the AMAs and then we can do this towards the end?
Sure.
I'll share it with you in the meantime.
Thanks.
So I also looked through it, and my first question, based on the introduction here, is which parts of the model are going to be changed by the front end we're building, because you could probably boil it down to a few variables that users would actually change, and it's unclear which those are.
Well, I think the sheer volume is actually quite large, but as Griff said, I think part of this collaborative process is going to be prioritizing those.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest, most the best question and the most fun question for us to figure out. We get to decide the scope of work here. So and like which inputs we think are the best. So I think the goal will be to answer that question throughout the week, and we'll assign people who are interested to it, or people who are interested in helping answer that question can self-assign, and that'll be one of the things we work on.
Cool.
Any other good questions?
Yeah. So I'm thinking, because actually with the project and the fact that we need to kind of like use it, is there maybe what I can contribute is actually take the role of final user test and give my opinion on the result and testing it and see what is missing for us, what is missing to make the other guys of the team and the investors understand it. Yeah, so I guess I could take that role if needed.
Sure. So wait, what was the question though?
If I guess the question is if someone is already taking this role to do the testing, user testing, and if not, I'm proposing myself for that role.
Okay. Yeah, user testing will be a thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool.
I also checked out the code, but I didn't understand almost anything. So I go back to read the bonding curve, medium costs, and all that stuff. I think that the video on Intro to Cyber Physical Commons Framework with Jeff and Sagram is going to be quite interesting to understand all the flow on the Python code. And my but I still didn't do that. So probably for the next week, I will have my homework done. My question right now is how are really connected the two demos that Common Stack already have on ABC and conviction voting. How those demos are connected with the Python code, the Jupyter code? Because
So
I still don't see that.
So I can answer a lot of this now. The demos that we have right now are not connected to the Python code at all. They are JavaScript's like self-made imitations almost to help visualize it for displaying it in hackathons. The current Python code, like cadCAD simulation, does include an augmented bonding curve and the conviction voting module. However, most of the outputs are focused on conviction voting and visualizing that. So which is convenient in a way because the augmented bonding curve JavaScript implementation that's on the commonstack.org website right now is pretty complete. Like it's usable, it's easy, and I think it describes a bonding curve pretty well. The conviction voting JavaScript implementations that we have are only of conviction growing, and it doesn't have any trigger function pieces. So it'll be really nice to kind of scale up. Like one of the intentions of this work is to actually use this eventually as the simulation for the conviction voting, so people can see what we're doing so people can understand what conviction voting is by playing with this app, just like people can understand what augmented bonding curves are by playing with the first app that's already on the website. But the one that's already on the website doesn't have cadCAD involved at all. It's almost a fake, like it's a narrative showcase is what we call it, and it's not really a good simulation. It just shows people what's going on.
So in the case of conviction voting, what we usually have is 3 parameters that are usually static, like alpha, which is one of the most important ones, which is the decay. And we have this as input, and as output, we might have, for example, how much time is going to be needed to proposal of 1,000i to pass, for example. Are you thinking on doing something like that, like having these inputs and outputs?
That's exactly it. So like you said, there's kind of 3 main parameters in conviction voting. There's alpha, beta, and W. I think are like the 3 most important parameters that we have in our designs. I imagine that those will make the cut for the inputs, and then the outputs that we have, they're basically all the graphs that you see when you run the Google Colab. And so we'll have to pick amongst the graphs that are already there for outputs. And then there'll be a variety of inputs that we can choose. There's so many because there's all the augmented bonding curve stuff too. So we get to choose, or you guys get to choose, really, which ones we want to use and which ones will be interesting.
Sam, if you have an example of this conviction voting, I guess, simulation that you've implemented, if you can share with the team, that'll be great. Then we have something to kind of as like a starting point, a launching point. If you want to share, of course.
Okay. I think that it was Spunet who began with the. I mean, I did not do any. I just modified the simulation that Spunet did.
Actually, there's a link to it in the SOW. It's called P2P Models Conviction Voting JavaScript Simulation. So he just made it. I actually think yours is a little bit better than Spunet's. So I linked it instead. I didn't even link Spunet's.
I think that I can improve it with the. I mean, I can work on the conviction voting part if you. Because I think that I have the. I don't understand the other parts, and I would like to understand them. But with the conviction voting, I can do a good job. Do you want me to share my screen and explain that? So, or you prefer to look at by your own?
Has everyone seen this simulation of conviction voting? Well, actually,
not yet.
let's leave the explainer till after the AMA part.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll dive in.
Yeah.
Because I think it will be a useful thing to give people some overview of conviction voting. Any other questions about, or I'm sure there's more questions about like this actual project and what we're trying to do? Well, Ben actually had one, which was a good question, which is what tech stack should we go with? And like for the front end and how do we connect to the cadCAD, like the collab, and actually have the front end interface with Google Colab? I don't know. Does anyone have any ideas on that?
I think that might be a homework assignment.
Yeah. Does anyone have any preferred like front end implementations? Vue, React?
I've got experience with both React and Vue. More experience with React, but I can manage.
Oh, sorry, more with what?
More experience with React, but happy to do Vue because I don't like Facebook.
Cool. Does anyone else have any other
I have experience with React and with Angular.
Okay.
Angular.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think this is another research one, and maybe also if we can see, I think to really help decide this, we may want to see if someone's ever built a front end that uses Google Colab as a back end. So that will probably help make this decision really easy, because if we can fork somebody's code that already did that.
I have a question related with that. Why did you choose Google Colab?
So we actually were originally, the plan was to go with like a cadCAD scaling solution where Block Science would host the backend for cadCAD simulations, and the problem is that simulations are very heavy and resource intensive, and that basically the way cadCAD is built right now, it doesn't handle multiple users at the same time very well. they need to like fix the load balancing or something or other, right? Like just the way it's designed, it doesn't play kindly with multiple users. So then we were like, okay, let's build an executable file so people can use their own computer. cadCAD's, it can be heavy, but like using your own computer, it only takes like a minute and a half or something to run a simulation, like this cadCAD 3 model, sorry, conviction voting 3 model that we're going to use. But downloading an executable kind of sucks. So we found out about Google Colab, which allows you to run these intensive simulations in their little environment. And now what we can do is basically have a user who has a Google account, which is basically everyone, sadly, that anyone can actually run this simulation for free on Google servers. And that will make, I think that has the potential of making a better user experience. And it also could allow people to kind of get a little bit deeper if they want, right? So we give them a front end, and that's like, ooh, I can tweak some of these things. And if we put some kind of interesting like a teaser there that if they want, they can like actually check out the collab and they can go deeper. Then if we document the collab well, then they can really understand more of the simulation, and it can be a kind of a gateway tool into getting deeper into the Python code.
Mm.
So it sounded really good, and really we owe Ravi. Ravi did all this research to figure out the scope of work, and I think it turned out really well. And this is now, of course, now we're going to have a major technical hurdle to overcome, which is how the hell do we make a front end change something in Google Colab? That I guess that's another question I want to add.
Now that I think about it, Angular might be the best option because it's Google maintained, and in terms of backend, we might look into Firebase if we need that. I know it's not decentralized, but it could be the most convenient option. And since Sam has experience with Angular, but I'm really open. I don't mean to be too opinionated.
Yeah. Well, what's nice is we're not trying to answer this question today. We're gonna hope in our next section we're going to talk about how we research these problems, and people, everyone can kind of jump in and say, I'll take this, I'll take that.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very interested in how you develop applications that aren't centralized, as you know, Griff. So I've been studying this a lot. So one of the things I might be able to add is sort of poke at these ideas that we have to use these centralized things and help maybe bring links or information that I find about. A lot of people are talking about a lot of these exact same issues. So there are opportunities that aren't ready yet, probably, but they're coming. So we want to be there to understand that. And it's sort of along the lines of downloading an executable.
Yeah,
it's kind of what it is. I think you're going to end up eventually, if you want to decentralize, you're going to download executables.
That was, Thomas, that was the original plan. I think so. There are two major hurdles that we ran into. One was there's general consensus among the block science team that creating an executable is a complicated process that can be quite buggy. So, it's basically going to take time and resources to do. And the next biggest hurdle was the fact that we don't have the funds to cover up for that time and resource that blockchain will put in, that block science will put in. So, with these two major issues to develop an executable, the next thing that I found, and I by no means say it's the best solution, was Google Colab. So if you have something that you think we can do better at, I'm all ears.
I will say that the final projects, like Common Stack, will be very decentralized, like more decentralized than any project I can think of, honestly.
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm so interested in what you're doing. Absolutely.
And I want I fully expect people to be able to honestly use TrueBlocks to run to analyze the properties of their commons and match it up to a cadCAD simulation that they are running on their own server, ideally a DApp node. Right, I'm trying to break it on my computers.
All coming together, and people are starting to figure this out. I don't think anything's really anywhere near ready now, as far as this whole. Basically, the stack is getting rewritten, and it's just not ready. But anyway, I won't make the point any further.
Well, but I do think this is a valuable question because in the end, this is the goal of the common stack: is how do we make this decentralized? Now, this POC is not in scope, but but in the end. That having that question be answered eventually, or like even keeping it top of mind, I think will be a valuable exercise for us during this process.
I think so, yeah.
If the computation is not that heavy and it can be executed in the computer, probably it could be executed with an executable with WebAssembly, but probably it's a lot of research and development.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that in the end, we have to also execute cadCAD, right? Like that's the challenge. We need to like turn cadCAD into part of the executable.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets stuck. The Python code, yeah, whatever. Like I originally I was like, oh yeah, throw it in executable. That seems easy. But then it's like, oh wait, we have to include all of cadCAD in this.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah. So
I mean,
that's okay. It's not in scope. We're going to use Google Colab. I mean, unless all of a sudden we find a hurdle, then we can, we either jump over it or we have to go on.
For the front-end part, I will reuse the front-end that you already have for ABC and conviction voting.
But this is where it's going to get interesting, is because the model does both simultaneously. So how do you combine the two front ends?
Yeah, honestly, now I'm open for suggestions here for sure. But honestly, I'm not worried about making things pretty. And if we just have like whether it's a slider or even just a little text box that says the variable, a tooltip that explains what the variable is, and an input, and it just like looks like something you'd see on an old MS-DOS machine, that's fine. Like it doesn't have to be pretty. Like so the main thing is that and like the cool, honestly, it doesn't need to show like we don't need to generate our own plots. We're going to use cadCAD's plots, or at least cadCAD's CSV to generate that it uses to create a plot as outputs. So like on the inputs, it can just be super basic. On the outputs, it might need to be a little more stylized so that people feel that little happy, ooh, I just made something, right? But I don't see us reusing anything from that we already have, honestly. Maybe. I mean, maybe we can use some components that are like sliders or something, but
I'm looking through the. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Google Colab has forms and widgets, which we could probably use, and don't even need another front end. We could abstract the deeper notebook and have a separate one for new users, and we wouldn't even have to worry about hosting or anything. I just found
that was actually the suggestion that Marcus had, and Marcus was the one who helped me kind of set up a lot of the Google Colabs. So yeah, that was one of the potential ways of solving that problem.
Okay.
So wait, when you say widgets, is this like a customizable widget? Like we can, because one of the big, yeah, go ahead.
So I was looking just now. looking through it, but it seems like forms might be more useful because that's an easy way to parameterize the code. The widgets, it says, are for redirecting future outputs to a particular place in the layout. So we probably use those two, but for this initial project of managing inputs from users, I guess forms would be helpful.
Hell yeah. And I mean, eventually we will want to host this on a website. So even if we have to just make a input for forms, that might be the easiest way.
Yeah, I'm sure there's an easy way to do that, but I'm just now looking into it. I'm happy to take that on as a research project to figure out if there's examples of interfaces that are hooked into forms, but obviously ready to collaborate with anyone else who's interested in that.
Hell yeah. Yeah, we're almost to that stage where we start dishing this out. But okay, so then the question will be outputs too. So making sure that we have a good, clean way. So if the widgets can do outputs and put that in some kind of display that's like easy to understand, oh my God, this might be so easy.
I think it should be fairly straightforward.
Very cool.
Well,
and I think
yeah.
embedding it into a website might be simple as well.
Yeah,
But definitely a lot simpler than developing an API or from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true because Google Sheets, you can just assign it to a website. And I imagine Google Colab or Google Forms, like you might be able to do that as well. Sam, you were going to say something though?
Yeah, I still don't know if this is the best way to do that, because having our own web interface, and we can control much more what people can do, and also it is easier later because if we do this with Google, the things that we can do later on must be done inside the Google Colab, and we can not later on connect cadCAD directly on the front end. You understand? It's
Yeah,
like if we use Google as just a server, it is okay because all the code is open source. But if we use their tools too, we are not doing an open source project. We are using Google website to do our thing, but then it is much more difficult to continue with the work, do our own customizations and all that stuff.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we're going to have to debate on how much we want to rely on Google. I think that's probably a question that will need some research.
Well, I mean, it's always possible to develop this in multiple stages, right? You might want to start with the quickest solution, which may not be the best solution because it'll allow for a lot of discovery. And I think that's probably going to be a chunk of what we learn from this exercise. Is going to be how the code works, inputs, outputs. And if we do figure out a good way to combine forms and widgets with Google Colab, that kind of collection of skills could be very useful for future, quick future deployments of code while we're working on a more elaborate API. So it gets the tool in people's hands quicker and allows the team to develop a new skill set while we develop a more permanent, better solution.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I agree that when we go ahead and see how to do it, we will see which is the easiest and fastest way, and maybe we can begin with one thing and go to the other one. I just was saying that this complaint, but I mean, if we go on one side or the other first, we'll see what is the easiest way.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, we definitely, it's what's most important is that you guys are having fun working on this project and learning about cadCAD and learning about the conviction voting model and like understanding these things and feel happy working on this project. And if working with Google makes you die a little inside, then we should throw that shit away. So anyway, let's see. I think we have some good questions. Some questions that didn't get added here is weekly sync times. So like in cadence, like I'm hoping that we can kind of have like a call like this once a week, and maybe we pick a time this week through using a doodle or something. And the other one, I guess, how to create an API for Jupyter notebooks. I think that's already kind of answered, asked in this, like, what framework and tech stack do we use, right? Okay. Any last quick questions before we start assigning things? Okay, so I will move the question. I will do a little bit of cleanup to move the questions that we need to have for the work. So question 1, what inputs should we use for the front end? That's going to be a fun one. Question 2, what outputs should we spit out for the project? That's another fun one. What I would say, like, what documentation do we need to clean up? Is question number 3, and there's some notes there underneath it. I'm going to put the weekly sync time as a question, number 4. Let's see what other questions are there. Basically the API question. So what framework tech stack do we go with? And I'll just add Google here, which is kind of along the lines of this one. What should the front end be? Like, how should we structure the front end? Kind of like, I guess this is kind of like wireframes.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I'm not sure if we should ask that question before we know what our inputs and outputs should be. So maybe this is for next week, but it's an option. It's definitely a question that needs to be answered. I'm going to leave how do we make this decentralized off. Let's put researching into Google Colab. Let's just put this as a separate one. Can Google tools work? And oh yeah, and then what stages do we want to have for this project? I think that's kind of a cool question too. Okay, so these are the 8 questions that I can pull out of our conversation here, 1 through 8. And I just want to pass it around and see if anyone wants to take on any questions. James, do you have like your top questions that you want to work on?
So I'll just say I agree with Sam that if we go down this path of using Google, it does make it difficult in the future to change what we're using. But I'm happy to research that and see the best way to move forward in the short term, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Any others that you're interested in checking out, or is that the main one? You can pick like 3. And the thing is, like, everyone, no one, it's not like we have to have one per person. Like, multiple people can pick the same one. Like, if everyone wants to just research Google tools, totally cool.
I'll take the one called 3A, which says there's a lot of words in the collab that are hard to understand. And I was thinking I could just kind of make a list of these words, I'll just bounce around on the various websites and so forth. And I'll just make a list eventually, even just for myself to start to get around my head around the words. And then we can maybe try to clarify them or something.
Okay, very cool.
Exactly.
And I definitely think it's going to be central in creating just a shared lexicon for the community, just so that, you know, it's like earlier this morning, Griff, you and I had a couple of, you know, complications in the conversations because we were saying the same thing in two slightly different ways. So
And
I think that would be a very valuable part of the, yeah.
And I might push towards simplifying over sort of becoming jargonistic.
Yeah.
Like jargon is such a barrier to entry for people, for regular people. So,
Okay, so I'm gonna bring the format back.
Sorry. Yep.
No, it's okay. So we're gonna do kind of a round of passing it and just assign these questions. I want to make sure that everyone can leave on time in case someone has another call or something. So James, you wanted to take on the Google Colab. Did you have any other questions you wanted to take on?
Yeah, the others, I'd be most interested in learning about cadCAD through exploring inputs and outputs.
Okay.
And I'm sure that'll be a discussion-based collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a fun one. You want to pick someone else?
I would also take those two.
Okay.
I
Any
would
other
like
one?
to work on that too.
Yeah, everyone. This is the fun stuff. This is the good one, right? Like, what the hell are we gonna put in and out? Like, let's build the scope. Okay. Well, Sam spoke up first. Do you have any other questions you want to take on, Sam?
The front end part, but I just want to see if, how do we. But it is later on when we understand what the program is doing.
Oh, is this the wireframes or is this the
Yes,
framework?
it is the wireframes.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Which can be on React or on Google. We will see.
Okay, cool. Nelson, did you want to pick some questions? Just the or
Yeah, the input
down.
outputs.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I guess I would like to take a look at the code and understand a little bit more the condition voting, because I'm not very familiar with it, and see if I can use the current model for the bounding curve token already.
Okay, yeah. And if Sam has time, hopefully we can go into the conviction voting right after this. And then next, let's see.
Cool.
Does I guess Ravi, do you have any ones that you want to take?
I do want to dig into the code more, and I want to just start to summarize each block of code. So, you know, just to kind of decrease the learning curve for anybody else looking at the code. Maybe try to do some of what James has mentioned, not with the words themselves, because I'm not particularly good with words, but how the different variables are interacting and what particular inputs and inputs at least could potentially be part of parameter sweeps. Kind of what I've been doing so far. Yeah, just to clarify each individual block of code. And then there's one more thing that it's not here, which I do think we need to work on, is uncurling the 3 additional supporting Jupyter notebooks that are linked to the collab sheet.
Oh yeah. Hey, quick question on that to all you developers. Does curl mean import? Like the first lines in the Google Colab, I don't know if you guys are in that right now. I'll put the link over here. Oh, it looks like, yeah. So I just put the link in Jitsi. but obviously most of you guys have seen this already. In the first 4 lines, there's like pip install cadCAD, and then there's curl, like a
Yeah, kind of. It downloads the code from GitHub,
from a URL. Right?
and it probably installs them inside the same folder.
Mhm.
It is not an import. It is for downloading them and saving them as a file.
So like one of the things we're going to need to do is actually change the content in these things. So like I imagine we'll need to uncurl, or Ravi is already looking into this a little, but we'll have to uncurl them and like put them in the Google Colab. Is that something that's going to break things, or?
Yes, because later on, well, wait, I'm not sure, but as you can see, it imports later on from conviction helpers, for example, import
Yeah.
one, which is the, I don't know which, these conviction helpers, it is just the, probably it's not going to break anything because it imports everything.
It
So
imports
probably,
everything right off the top.
I would say it wouldn't break. It's just taking from the GitHub the last version of the file and copying it locally and using it. I'm guessing we could probably also import it directly. I don't know if that would change some things in the code, but my initial guess would be no. But if we had to modify the content of, for example, the conventional helpers Python file, I'm guessing that if we have access to the block science GitHub, we could modify it there.
Well, we're going to probably need people to use our front end to change the parameters, and that will actually need to change stuff in that code. So we may need to have that code in the Google Colab.
On this Google, yeah.
Could we make like the actual code using a configuration file, and then that would be local, and then we modify the configuration file?
You guys are so fucking smart. Yes, that sounds great. So can I put this as a question, like how do we uncurl without breaking stuff? For the week, it sounds like you already have a solution, Nelson. That will probably.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a look at it. I'm not a Python developer originally, but we have. I've worked on similar stuff using JS. So maybe if someone else more familiar with the code wants to work with me, we can look at building a solution for that.
I'm happy. I'm also not a Python dev, but I'm pretty familiar with the code. I think also this might be a week 2 question once we figure out what the front end, like if we need to rebuild it to put like a, what did you say, a JSON file or whatever, or sorry, a local config file, then we probably
you could use the JSON or whatever format.
we'd probably want to just do that for only the ones that that we expect to change and like allow the user to change. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And that's what the front end does. It controls the way the thing runs. So yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna put you down on it, Nelson. But I have a feeling that it's probably for next week.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna take the weekly sync times and do a doodle for that, and I will also look at. I think this is for week 2 as well, but what stages we will do for working on this project, like whether or not we want to do a Google Colab and then like iteration, and then or like Google tool iteration, and then like actually our own front end or stuff. I'll try to do the research on what makes the most sense. And so like just know that having you guys go and dive in, it's this is about doing the research and like being able to inform us all about the question, and then hopefully we can just have like hopefully you can make a proposal, and then we can kind of have like a governance round. This is what we used to do in Giveth, and this is my proposal to governance for these decisions, is that everyone comes with a proposal, or like we collab on research on this stuff, and then we kind of try to decide it together, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, I like that. Yeah.
Cool. Well then, hey, I'm 7 minutes over. I'm so sorry. I was really trying to be on time. If anyone needs to go, this is a great time. But Sam, if you have a moment to show people your conviction voting tool, that was
Yes, sure.
a lot of work by Spunet, of course, as you said. But I think you did some really good work with it. So
Yeah, most of it is from Spunet. So do we do the closing round, or I go for it?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, just quick closing thoughts. So I'll model. Thanks for the great meeting, guys. It worked really well. I'm really surprised that the meeting agenda was mostly followed, and that it was really fun, and I feel like really productive. So thank you guys for coming. I'll pass it to James.
I'll just say I'm really excited to collaborate with you all and, you know, see this come to life. And, you know, it shouldn't be, you know, too much for me to participate in whatever you need, not only these 3 tasks. But yeah, really happy to be part of it.
Oh, and pass it to someone.
Yeah.
Pass it to Nelson.
Oh, you're muted, Nelson.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's quite nice to meet virtually all of you. I'm quite excited to discover all those tools and this big field, and looking forward to contribute as much as I can.
Pass it.
I will pass it to Ravi.
I think this is going to be an interesting test case for the community at large, and I think you know, to figure out a way of mapping community competencies and then trying to restructure the roadmap of development to match that skill set. I think this is going to be an interesting test case. I'm really looking forward to how we work together to really get this done in a timely fashion. I think it's going to be. I'm looking forward to the next couple of months. Yeah, and I'm going to pass it on to Jay.
Yeah, so I tweeted about 2 weeks ago that at the bottom of every rabbit hole is a wonderland, like an Alice in Wonderland. You fall to the bottom of the rabbit hole and it's like wonderful down there. So I'm looking for a wonderland, and I want to get down a rabbit hole. And I think this is a great thing, especially the complex systems engineering stuff. To me, that's just really interesting. So that's why I'm interested. But yeah, it's great. Looking forward to it. To whoever's left.
Me. I'm also very excited, and I like to I like to participate on this project with you, and also to learn how you have think on connecting those things. So that's everything.
Nice. Well, Sam, have you ever shared your screen on Jitsi before?
Yeah.
Okay. The joys of open source, you know, I try to be an open source maximalist as much as possible. Got to pick your battles. I decided to pick Jitsi for some reason, but I don't know. Sometimes it's the wrong choice.
Yeah, but I think that for this case, with Google Hangouts, it's also the same. Like, you have to also install everything.
Yeah.
By the way, for conviction voting, for those of you that didn't heard about it, it is another way to vote on things in which your vote gains power among the time. As you can see, this represents a time frame, and this represents the power of a vote. So when you vote on something, the conviction increases, and when you stop voting on it, it decreases also very, very slow. Here we have some people voting, and the sum of the conviction is the one that counts. It's in order to a proposal to pass, the conviction needs to reach a certain threshold. In this case, it is 50,000 in order for a 1,000 die proposal to pass. And as we can see in this simulation, we can restart it. Somebody votes, somebody else votes, the first person withdraws, but still the second person stakes a lot more of their tokens. You vote with your tokens in order to the sum of the convictions to pass the threshold. You can see here how this works. Also, this threshold depends on how much you are asking for and how much there is in the community to spend with the proposals. So, in the case of a proposal with 1,000, the threshold is on 50,000. But in the case for a 2,000 die, it's a lot much more. It's 200,000. So if we do exactly the same, we doesn't arrive. With the staking the same tokens and at the same times, we just arrive here, but we don't arrive with a 2,000 die proposal. So this is how conviction works, and I can go for the parameters in one moment, but it is a good time if you have some question of what I explained.
I do have one. I guess just to make sure I understand properly, like basically voting is based on time that you stake your tokens. That's what you count, and then there's a formula to calculate how much power that has.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And more tokens you put on a stake, more conviction you get over time. But also the conviction that you get with a certain amount of tokens is at the end capped. It's like it grows, but it doesn't grow to the infinite. It is capped at a certain point. Like if you put 1,000, the maximum conviction in this case is 10,000.
Okay, I think I completely understand what you showed us. The longer I keep my vote in place, the more power it gets up to a certain amount.
Yes.
Okay, so here's just I'm so ignorant about the words. Does this have anything at all to do with token bonding curve, or is this completely unrelated to token bonding curve?
It is not related, but we are going to connect it with augmented bonding curves.
With what? Say the word.
We are the thing is that we can use the token generated with bonding curves to stake on conviction voting.
Oh, and then the amount of total tokens which affects the required conviction grows depending on how many tokens are in place.
Yes,
How many tokens.
yes, it is one of the things, and also the other thing is that if you buy tokens in the bonding curve, you can stake them on proposals that you like. And yes, it is going to affect the required conviction, the threshold.
Does it affect the power calculation of the growth of your conviction?
No. Your conviction only depends on the tokens that you are staking and the time, and also a parameter that it's static. It's called alpha. It is the decay of the conviction.
That's after you remove your vote, where that gray line goes down. Is that the decay?
Yes. Also, it is the how fast it increases and how fast it decreases.
Okay. Well, this is great. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
I also put the details of the flows and the math of the conviction voting module. I just put a link to it. It's in the SOW. There's a link there, but also I put it in the Jitsi, and it will illustrate the math equation for the buildup of conviction and also the calculation of the threshold. One thing I want to add that's really interesting for conviction voting is that when you combine the threshold with the current amount of conviction voting, right, and you combine the threshold calculation, you can actually come up with a denomination for the amount of conviction, like the voting power behind a proposal, in a dollar amount. So you can say that the amount of voting power in this proposal is worth, 500 DAI. And what's really cool about that is for this application of funding public goods, it can almost become like a matching program where it's like, oh, well, the Commons is willing to put 5 right now in this proposal to support, in some support these orphans, we'll say, right? There is $500 in this $1,000 proposal that's being contributed by the Commons. So if you send in $500 right now, it will be matched by the Commons. And so now you're actually incentivizing external donations with your conviction voting scheme, which is really exciting for me and like funding public goods, because it is a collaborative. It can be a collaborative effort. Anyway, that's a tangent. I just get really excited about conviction voting. Sam, did you want to keep going?
Yeah.
I have one other question, if I could.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So you said basically right now with the model on conviction voting, you can connect that with the ABC, the augmented bounding curve. Would this model be able to be used to show the economics of the bounding curve and to play with the parameters, or we would have to build something completely different to do that?
We'll have to see. This kind of is going to take diving into the code and analyzing what outputs we have, because ideally, if there's something we really, really, really want to show as a team, we can ask the cadCAD, the guy who made this model, Andrew, and we can beg him to make something, and maybe pay him too, right? To make add something to cadCAD, to the cadCAD model. But the model is really touchy, so I wouldn't want us to try to customize anything.
Yeah, so the model is made for the voting, conviction voting.
Yeah, there might be some outputs that you could read into some like economic pieces of it and have some augmented. The augmented bonding curve is in the model. It's just I'm not sure how much outputs are there for it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sam, are you there? Uh-oh. Just in time. Connectivity issues. But yeah, the math behind conviction is actually not that crazy. It's it's modeling after neurons firing, and we keep all the complicated math in the threshold calculation, which ends up being a log calculation. And then the conviction voting adding is like really simple. Basically, the current conviction is just alpha times the conviction from before plus the number of tokens that are currently staked behind at this time. So it's like conviction at t-1 times alpha plus tokens at t equals conviction at t. And then it just adds. And you actually end up with this, it's really interesting. You end up with this curve that has an asymptote. And it actually looks really complicated, but very simple equation. The threshold is much more complicated.
I'm sorry, Griff. The threshold is the top red, the red line at the top.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
it's not that complicated. I have it in this Google Doc on the right, but off the top of my head, it's negative W log beta minus R, right? So like,
of course, what else could it be?
It's very obvious, right?
Yeah.
No, so in that, the W is effectively like a min quorum. So when you do the log of that, like you end up with like, no matter what the proposal is, there's an amount that everything needs to pass. So that if I ask for $1, it doesn't take just a little bit of money, right? A little bit of voting power. And then the beta is really interesting. That is effectively like the most amount of money that can ever be spent on one proposal if every token voted on it to the max amount of time. So that means like if you have a beta of 30%, there's going to be there will never be a time where a proposal that asks for 31% could ever pass of the total pot.
Yeah.
And then R is the percentage of the pot that you're asking for.
That's interesting. I can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, and when you combine these two equations, you get conviction voting, and it's a very useful. It's literally a governance method that was designed for one purpose: allocating funds to a bunch of random proposals. That's all it does. So like in the common stack, we're likely going to have multiple governance methods, like conviction voting for allocating funding. But then if you want to do something like upgrade the contracts or, pass whether or not this constitution should be the mission statement of the commons or whatever, you're going to use a regular yes, no, time box voting proposal system.
Very good. Great. Thank you.
Cool.
I guess something that came up at some point during the conversation to me is that it would be good not only to have a description of the parameters, but also how to choose them and what they mean. I don't know if it makes sense. Like why would I choose a lower value or a higher value, and what are the impacts on that? I guess that would be very useful for people that are not familiar, whether with the code or even the concept behind it.
Yeah, I think you're dead on. It's going to be really important on our front end. Like I feel like this project is almost about explaining these parameters almost as much as building the front end, right? And the more time you put into making clear explanations, the more powerful the product will be.
Yeah, when I was playing with the Aragon Black on Rinkeby, there was a description of the parameters. I'm like, okay, I understand what it means, but I don't understand. Yeah, if I choose 10% or 90%, what are the impacts?
Yeah. Well, cool, guys. I think we all have our questions that we're going to answer. I might, Ravi or I will probably like ping you guys in this channel and give a little social pressure, a little social boost to on the progress of us throughout the week. And of course, no
Please do.
obligation. Yeah, exactly. I think everyone wants to, but of course, we all have very busy lives, and this is the only contributions we're going to give are CStack tokens. So, which are non-transferable, non-monetary reputation in our trusted seed. So, like, this is not a paid gig, unless we basically we do have some budget for this project, but it's going to be held to the very end because it's not much. And it's not useful, really, and except for maybe finishing or maybe like an emergency, like block science, please work on this thing, it's broken. You know, it's kind of like emergency funds. So yeah, but we will do. I will be dishing praise for everyone that was here and like even in person. I just want to thank you guys all for coming and hanging out. It was really fun.
Hello.
Hey Sam, actually.
He's back.
I was just saying goodbye to everyone, and you came back just in time, man.
Goodbye, guys. Next week,
Thanks for everything, guys.
I can explain it better.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Ciao.